If you're new to DayZ, you've probably realised how difficult the game can be. This guide should tell you all you need to know when getting started. Once you understand the basics, the rest will start to fall into place. At first though, you probably are going to die a lot, but if you keep going, you'll pick things up very quickly. As soon as you connect to a server, you'll find yourself spawning on or near the coast if the map is generous. Starting out generous would be my recommendation, as it's the most well-rounded and balanced map available, and it's just easy to learn. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see your heads-up display. On the right side are your status levels. These are thirst, hunger, temperature, blood and health. On the left side is your stamina bar, as well as your noise or visibility indicator. The slower you move, the less chance you have of alerting something. To open your inventory, you can press the button shown on screen depending on your platform. Generally, you will spawn with at least some rags, which you can use to stop bleeds. Make sure you also go into your settings and take a look at some of the basic controls like sprinting, leaning, crouching and so on. Usually, the first thing players should aim to do is find basic items in the coastal towns near where they spawn before moving further inland as soon as possible. When you spawn in, your thirst and hunger levels will already be somewhat depleted, so finding food and water will be your first priority. You may see these small fishing boats along the coast. They are worth checking as they can sometimes spawn food, clothing, backpacks and even fishing rods. You probably won't have a clue where you are, but there are some basic tips you should know that will help. Power lines and rail tracks will always ultimately pass through towns. If you can't see any of these where you spawn, just follow the coast for a few minutes and you'll likely end up spotting a town anyway. When you do find a town, you can actually use the road signs to pinpoint exactly where you are by using the iSurvive map. This is a third-party resource which I would suggest all new players to become familiar with. When you find a sign, you can type the letters into the map as closely as you can with English characters, and the map will actually be able to recognise what you're typing so you can find out where you are. You can also see where all the different spawn locations are on the map, but you don't need to focus much on these as you'll learn each of the spawn areas over time. When you're in a town, you should move between buildings and check them for basic items such as clothing, backpacks, food, knives or other melee weapons. In coastal towns, you might struggle to find items as other players are constantly spawning and moving through these areas, which is why you need to move inland as soon as you can. Watch out for zombies and try not to aggro them. If they manage to hit you, there's a good chance they'll make you bleed, and depending on the server you're on, you may not spawn with clean rags or bandages. These need to be disinfected before using them, otherwise your character could become sick and die over time unless the wound is treated. Hover over them in your inventory. If they've been disinfected, it'll say so on the screen. Avoid making too much noise and crouch around to prevent zombies spotting you. If you do get infected, you'll notice your character moaning and your screen will pulsate slightly. You'll need to disinfect the wound using either iodine, alcohol tincture or disinfectant. If you aren't able to find any of these in time, the infection will move to the next stage where you will actually begin losing health over time. In this scenario, you will now need to find tetracycline pills which will cure you after a short period of time. Keep using the pills until you're healed, but don't use them all at once. Wait until the pill icon disappears and then use another one. If you are bleeding and notice you don't have any clean bandages, it's worth noting that cuts will heal themselves after about 5 minutes, meaning you won't get infected but you will lose some blood, which does go back up over time. If you only have one bleed, then this is probably worth doing. Finding water is your overall priority at first. If you can't find any drinks to loot, you can use a water pump. The iSurvive map will show you where each and every one is located. As a general rule of thumb, every town will have one. There are actually various containers you can fill up with water, some examples are shown on screen. All you have to do is approach the pump with the item in your hand and you'll get an option to fill it up. If you don't have anything to put water in, you can just drink with your hands. Your thirst will go up much faster, however, if you drink from a container. When eating or drinking, keep an eye on your status levels. When your character's stomach is full, you'll see an icon pop up. When you see this, you need to stop, or your character will be sick and you'll lose energy and liquids. Killing zombies can be a good method of finding food. They'll often spawn cans on them, so if you're able to safely kill them, it would be worth doing so. There are several ways to open cans, the most obvious being with a can opener. But you can also use any sharp item like knives or even blunt objects, however you will spill a considerable amount of the food doing it this way. Whilst you're running around, if you hear any chickens, you should try to find them and kill them for food. Note that you will need a sharp object to butcher it, but you can still kill it and pick up the corpse until you find one. Remember that when you cut up an animal or even a player corpse, unless you're wearing gloves, your hands will become bloodied. If you eat or drink, your character can become sick, so you'll need to clean your hands. You can do this in a body of water, at a water pump, with a container of water, or with disinfectant. It's also worth grabbing the bones as well, as you can turn these into fishing hooks. Fishing is a fairly reliable and easy way of getting food if you're struggling to find any. To craft an improvised fishing rod, you'll need to combine a long stick with a rope. Simply drag the items on top of each other and you should see the option. If you're on console, drop one item on the floor and look at it with the other in your hand. To craft an improvised hook, combine a bone with your knife. Finally, attach some bait to your hook. You can dig up earthworms using a farming hoe, shovel, pickaxe or a knife. Just look at the dirt and you should see the option. Attach the hook to the rod and you can begin fishing in a pool of water. You can catch mackerel and carp with your fishing rod depending whether you fish in fresh water or salt water. Look towards the water and you should see the option to begin fishing. After a few moments you should make a catch. Butcher the fish and you'll receive 2 fillets. You'll want to cook these to avoid getting sick, but also to maximise energy gain. The easiest way to cook them would be to find a house with a stove inside. To get the fire going, you can find a small bush and use your hands or a knife to take sticks from it. If you use your hands, there is a chance you could get a bleed. Grab the sticks and approach the stove with them to combine them. You'll also need to add a piece of tinder, which could be a rag or bandage, or some bark from a tree. Use a knife to cut it off. Place it inside and then you'll be able to light it if you have matches or a lighter. If not, you can craft yourself a hand drill kit by combining a piece of bark with a short stick. You can snap the long sticks to turn them into short sticks. Once your fire is going, simply place your food into the cooking slots. Once you see them change colour, they're ready. All of this applies to any other form of meat that needs to be cooked. It's also possible to cook over a campfire, which can be crafted several ways, but an easy way is just by combining a stick with a rag or piece of bark. You will likely need to add a couple of extra sticks or logs to the fire to keep it fueled for long enough. You can use a knife to sharpen a long stick, which you can then attach pieces of food onto the end of. With this in your hand, you can point it at the fire for an option to roast the food. This does take longer than the first method, but if you do not have access to a building with a stove, it may be necessary. Fires can also be useful when your character is getting cold, which can cause you to lose health over time. Being too wet from the rain or being in water can also cause your temperature to drop fast. Staying near the fire will raise your temperature and dry you off, eventually also giving you a heat buff, which is a temporary immunity from the cold. Keeping your temperature up is important, as if it gets too low, you will suffer energy loss as a result. When your clothes are soaked, it will say so when you hover over them. You can take them off and place certain clothing items into your hands for an option to wring them out, which will help them dry faster. Once you have acquired some basic loot from the coastal areas, you can begin trying to move further up north, where you can find towns that have more items and ideally some guns and ammo. Try to use the road signs and the Eyes of Life map to find out where you are and pick a general direction to head in. As you travel, look out for these hunting stands. You'll often see them along tree lines overlooking fields. They can spawn hunting grade gear, which means you can find rifles, scopes, ammo and high quality clothing. Navigation is going to be an issue at first, and unfortunately outside of using the map and a compass, there isn't much you can do except keep playing and learn the map more over time. If you ever get stuck with something in particular, the DayZ wiki page is a very useful resource, and you should be able to find out anything you need using it. As you travel and encounter zombies or other players, you may find that when attacked, your clothing can become damaged, or sometimes clothing items can spawn slightly damaged. You can repair most clothing using a sewing kit by combining the 2 items. Ruined items cannot be repaired and should be swapped out, as they offer you no insulation once at this point. You can repair from badly damaged up to worn condition. Remember that you can use a sewing kit to stitch a wound, but you will need to make sure that it has been disinfected first. There are various different medical items in DayZ. You can find these most commonly in hospital and clinic type buildings throughout the map. Here is an overview of some items you can find and what they're for. Chlorine tablets are used to sanitize a container of water that hasn't come from a pump, which can be very useful if you aren't near any towns, so you can fill up at lakes or creeks. The main purpose of the saline bag is blood regeneration. Using one will boost your regeneration to 5 times the normal amount for a few minutes, whilst also boosting your hydration. You will need to combine a saline bag with an IV start kit before it can be used. These can also be commonly found in medical areas. Charcoal tablets are most commonly used for curing food poisoning caused by eating raw meat or eating with bloody hands. They can also be used to cure chemical poisoning caused by consumption of disinfectant, gasoline or alcohol tincture. Tetracycline is an antibiotic used to treat cholera from dirty water, wound infection or the cold. Multivitamins boost your immune system strength for 5 minutes, helping to fight all diseases. Unlike most other pills, you can take a tetracycline and multivitamin at the same time and they both work together, although only one icon will appear on the heads-up display. Codeine is used to treat pain, sprains and fractures. They'll allow you to move slightly faster when your character is hurt. Morphine will negate the low health movement speed effect and prevent you from going unconscious due to pain. It will last for 1 minute. Epinephrine can be used on unconscious players to immediately awaken them. It can also be used to remove stamina consumption for 1 minute. The Pox Injector is primarily used to cure the gas poisoning illness. If a player is in stage 1 or 2, it will cure them fully. However, if the illness is within stage 3, then it will just set it back to stage 2. It can also be used like an epinephrine to instantly wake up an unconscious player. In DayZ you can find contaminated gas zones. There are 2 types, which are either static or dynamic zones, which means some are permanent and others move around. These zones are extremely poisonous and they'll cause players within them to become very sick and die within minutes. The only way to safely enter these zones is with a full NBC suit, which consists of a hood, jacket, gloves, pants, boots and a gas mask with a filter attached. These clothing items can be found around Chernarus, usually 1 piece at a time. The gas mask filter will decay over use, so it's useful to have several in your inventory so you can swap them out when necessary. On Chernarus, the 2 static gas zones are at Pavlovo Military Base and the shipwreck at Riffi. iSurvive will show you where all of the dynamic zones can potentially be. When a zone changes location, you'll hear what sounds like a missile dropping followed by a large explosion. If this lands on you, it's very important that you sprint out of there as quickly as possible to avoid being poisoned. As most players won't have a full NBC suit and gas mask, their static zones will usually have some of the absolute best loot available on the map at any given time, so it's worth keeping an eye out for pieces of the NBC clothing as you travel the map. And that just about sums up the guide. From this, you should now hopefully have a good foundation to start playing from. There is a lot more to learn, but that's what makes the game so good. All resources referenced in this video are linked in the description, as well as an invite to my Discord server which I've recently reopened, so feel free to join and let me know if you have any questions.